Today we're going to talk about religious differences. No, I don't mean the difference between Catholics and Protestants or Buddhists and Muslims, not those religious differences. I mean the differences between monks and friars and nuns and sisters and brothers and priests. Let's pour some coffee on that. I'm Father Brad Doyle, and you're watching Coffee Talk, where we drink coffee and talk about Jesus. And today I am escaping purgatory by drinking my coffee. You get it? Purgatory. The anguish, prolonged period spent waiting for a fresh pot of coffee to be ready. I want to set a stage. I want to set a moment for you, okay? So it's Halloween. You're at some restaurant, a bar of sorts, and there's this guy dressed up in robes, brown robes, maybe a rope belt with 3 knots in it. And he's calling himself a monk. He's going walking around saying, "Yeah, I'm a monk for Halloween." And you say, "Wrong!" Not just because he shouldn't really be dressing up like a monk and passing himself off, but because he's not a monk. And you know it because you watched this video. So you sit him down and you say, "I can prove to you, if I can prove to you that you're not a monk, but you're something else, will you buy me a beer?" Talking about the differences between monks and friars and religious sisters and nuns. And a lot of people use those interchangeably. Right? They think they're synonyms when they're actually not. And I think it's important for us as Catholics to know the difference, to experience the rich, beautiful diversity in the church, and even particularly in this one section of the church, which is religious life, right? Those people who have vowed poverty, chastity, and obedience. So, quick history lesson. In the early church, it was persecuted. You couldn't be a Christian legally, and a lot of times that would manifest in sometimes death, martyrdom for the faith. People were running, hiding, saying mass in the catacombs. They had no time to be lukewarm. In fact, you couldn't be a lukewarm Christian because you were literally dying for your faith until about 311. At the Edict of Milan, Constantine made it legal in the Roman Empire to be a Christian, and immediately ushered in complacency. When we're not persecuted, we become complacent. And so there was men and women who wanted to continue that radical witness of their faith. They wanted to continue a martyrdom in a sense, but there was nobody killing them. They wanted radicalness. And so the movement of the Desert Fathers and sisters started. And those are people who were hermits that would go out into the wilderness, go out into the woods. They'd pray into the deserts, and they'd pray, they'd fast, they'd live out their life in white martyrdom. At some point in history, about in the 500s, people realized, hey, for the majority of people, we shouldn't be alone in the desert. Instead, we need to live in community. So St. Benedict was one of the first people to gather a community of people together in what's called a monastery to follow a rule of life that he wrote down. It's called the Rule of St. Benedict. And he became the father of Western monasticism. In the religious order he founded, it's called the Benedictines. You've probably heard it before. His sister, his twin sister, St. Scholastica, was a Benedictine as well. She founded a monastery of women. St. Benedict is a monk. St. Scholastica is a nun. And all of the traditions that flow from monasteries, places, individual, stable places where people spend their entire lives, they are monks and they're nuns. Right, so a Benedictine monk, or any kind of monk, the distinguishing factor is stability. They live in one place, with one community, with one group of people. They live off the land. They work and they pray, or ora et labora, prayer and work. That is their motto. And that's what distinguishes a monk. Usually Benedictines, another way to distinguish them, they're usually wearing black habits with black scapulars. A scapular is a cloth that goes on the front and the back. It's got a hood on it. And you can recognize monks and nuns, by Benedictines at least, by that. Now what about friars then? What is a friar, and what's the difference between a monk and a friar, or a nun and a religious sister? Well, at some point in history, around right after the turn of the first millennia, there was two men, Francis and Dominic, who founded the Franciscans and the Dominicans. And they felt a call by God on their heart to have a religious community, but that wasn't held in by the walls of one monastery or the stability of one place. Instead, they would go out, they'd be mendicant, they'd be beggars, they'd be poor. And they'd spread the gospel through preaching and through serving the poor and through encountering people and moving from place to place wherever the Spirit willed, and they'd follow that. And those are called friars. So you have Dominican friars and you have Franciscan friars. And anywhere they live, as they're in their travels, is called a friary. So what about nuns and sisters? Well, nuns and sisters are the same distinction between monks and friars. Right? A nun is a religious woman who is stable in one place, lives at a monastery, and she works and prays, and she's in that place. She takes a vow of stability. A religious sister is like a friar, a Dominican or a Franciscan, and she's mendicant. She can move around, get different assignments. So a monk is to a nun as a friar is to a religious sister. And so that's the difference between a monastery, a friary, a monk, and a friar, a nun, and a sister. Oh no, someone's calling me.
Most people just probably know just the verbiage of it, but don't really know what makes a friar and a monk.
Hey, that's why we're doing this, people. Woo! That's Cole Catalano, baseball coach of St. Thomas Aquinas High School. Dominicans usually are seen, you can recognize them by the black and white habits. So they either have a fully white habit or maybe a combination of black and white, and their colors usually in the Dominican schools are black and white, and their motto is Veritas, which means truth. Franciscans are usually seen in brown or gray habits, very muted colors, very like earthy colors, and they are distinguished a lot of times by their cincture, or the rope or the cord that ties their habit down, and they'll have 3 knots. If you've ever seen that, 3 knots in their rope, and that is to symbolize poverty, chastity, and obedience, the 3 vows that they take. And remember, they don't take that 4th vow of stability like the Benedictines, so they have 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience to their superiors. Okay, so what is the difference between a brother and a priest? A brother signifies somebody who is in a religious community, a religious order. A Benedictine brother, a Dominican brother, we call them friars, Franciscan brother or friar, Jesuits, Vincentians, and there's all kinds of different religious orders. Someone who vowed to be part of a community. And in that community, you can have some of the brothers be priests. So you have a Benedictine monk who is a brother, but he's ordained, and that person's a priest. So not all brothers are priests, but some priests are brothers. Then you have priests who take vows of chastity and obedience, not poverty. I mean, we take a promise of simplicity in a sense, but obviously we have to have cars and own personal cars to get different places and stuff where a monk doesn't have to, right? So we don't take vows of poverty, but chastity and obedience. And some diocesan priests or secular priests are not brothers. Right? So you can be a priest and not a brother. You can be a brother and not a priest, and you can be a priest and a brother. That's the distinction. Ordination versus religious order. So the moral of the story is, the next time you're at a bar and there's some noob walking around in a Franciscan friar's habit saying he's a monk, you sit his butt down. You open up this video and you win yourself a free beer.